Welcome to our Ask the Trainer, Why Doesn't My Dog Listen to Me? I'm Laura Maihofer, certified professional dog trainer and behavioral consultant with Canine Turbo Training. There are a variety of reasons our dogs might not listen. And some of the major ones are that they're overwhelmed, overstimulated, or distracted by something in the environment. This could be something specific, or it could be the environment itself. But being overwhelmed or stressed, as we're going to talk about more in our next slide, makes it really difficult for the dog to listen to even really well-known cues. They also might not fully understand what we're asking of them, or be confused about the cue in that specific moment. This is much more common than people tend to think. They might not be physically able to do the behavior, or performing that specific behavior in that context could be causing them pain. And we'll talk about how to determine whether or not your dog might be experiencing pain during certain behaviors, and when it's best to talk to your vet. And along the lines of medical reasons, for some of our dogs, they might not actually be receiving the message. So it's possible they might not be able to perceive the cue that we're offering them. And we'll discuss also how to recognize if your dog might not be getting the message at all. And finally, it's very possible that something else in the environment is more reinforcing than what we have to offer. So your dog might be able to hear you, they might understand that cue, but they might decide it is not worth it for them. This is what people most commonly think is the reason their dog is not listening. It can be true, and we'll talk about how to identify if that's the case, and then modify it so that our dogs listen more. First, I want to discuss feeling overwhelmed or distracted, because this is what I see most frequently for dogs who aren't listening. When a dog is stressed, their body goes through physiological changes, and at a certain level of stress, we call them over threshold, which simply means their body is reacting to the stress of the environment. Now, stress comes in lots of forms. Your dog could be fearful, they could be frustrated, they could be excited. And all those kinds of stress can lead to increased difficulty in responding to cues. I'm going to talk quite a bit about what happens when your dog is afraid, because we see this very often as a reason for a dog not to respond to a cue. But a similar process will happen if your dog is really excited and over-aroused. So when your animal is feeling an emotion very intensely, and even in humans, we find that part of the brain called the limbic system is going to be more active. This part of the brain processes emotion at a very base level. Sometimes it's referred to as your lizard brain. The limbic system inhibits the cerebral cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. That's where we make decisions, make choices, have complex thought. So if the limbic system is activated, the thought processing center of the brain is inhibited. So a stressed animal, even if they perceive what you're saying to them, we say, come here, come on, they might not be able to put together what that means in the moment or respond to it. Now, stressed animals, especially our fearful dogs, are going to have physiological changes, even more than just in the brain. So their blood is going to flow into different locations. Studies have shown that it tends to go towards the limbs in case they need to run. It can go towards the mouth in dogs in case they need to bite. But one of the places the blood is not flowing very frequently is to the auditory processing systems. So your dog's ears might not actually be picking up on the sounds you're putting out. That auditory system tends to focus in on what is scary in that moment. So if you have a dog, let's say on a fence line, who's reacting to another dog that they're seeing, or a person that they're seeing, their ears are pricked forward and they're barking and lunging, and you're calling to them and calling to them and calling to them, and they are not listening to you, One thing you might notice is if you come up close and touch your dog, they might jump and startle and look at you. That often occurs because they didn't hear you. They had no idea you were right behind them until they felt that physical touch. Finally, when your dog is fearful or stressed, that fight or flight instinct is putting them into survival mode. They might not find sitting in that moment to be very important, even if they hear you saying it and can think about what that word means. My favorite example for this is if you are walking with a friend at night in a dark parking garage. And let's say your friend and you have this little game where they give you little word puzzles or even math problems, very basic math problems, and you're supposed to rapid fire answer these word puzzles or math problems. A nerdy game. I've never actually played it, but this is my favorite example. So let's say it's math problems, and they say, what's 5 plus 5? And you say 10. And they say, what's 5 times 3? And you say 15. And it's a fun little game you play for some reason. But this evening, you're walking through this parking garage, and as you're playing this game, 4 large people come out of the corners of the parking garage and all start walking in your direction, surrounding you. Now, let's say your friend, during all this, turns to you and says, what's 2 times 6? The answer might be simple. You might know immediately in your brain the answer is 12. I hope. I haven't done my arithmetic in a long time. But that is not important in the moment. So you might not answer them, even if you know, because your body and brain is focused on what's happening around you, your surroundings. That is much more important right now. And you might even slap your friend. Hey, look at this. This is more important. In our dogs, we get a similar effect. There is something scary in front of me. This is much more important than anything you are asking me to do right now. And they can even get aggressive, can redirect if we're trying to force them to do a behavior when they think there is something that is risking their survival in the environment. Now, another version of a threshold is a threshold of arousal and excitement. So here, this photo is actually of my dog, Genora, and I hope you can see about 15 or 20 feet in front of her, there is a cat. Now, we did not mean to get this close to a cat. I did not see that cat until we came around this tree, and there we were. Now, Genora loves cats, but not as friends or social partners. Genora shows predatory behaviors when she sees cats. And this was very early on in our relationship, but I have a concern of what she might do towards cats because she gets very excited, very low, and gets very stalky when she sees them. Here in this photo, I could call her to me all day long if I wanted to, and it is very unlikely that she would respond at all in that moment. She is completely focused in on what she views as her prey. Now, if you end up in this situation with your dogs, I don't recommend taking a photo in this moment. Instead, we want to increase distance. With Genora, we did have to use a tiny bit of leash pressure in this moment because none of our training had prepared her for this distance to a cat. She was too excited and she would like to eat them. So we moved further away and then we started training. Another situation where you might see your dog overly distracted is if they see someone that they really love. There's somebody they really love coming up the door, they're walking up the steps, and you are asking your dog to sit and they are not sitting. That can be because excitement is another form of stress. They're aroused, they're really happy, they're jumping all around, and we're asking them to sit. And for them, sitting is just not as important in that moment. So take our 2 friends who like to do math problems together as fun. Let's say they're at the airport waiting for a friend they haven't seen in 5 years to arrive. They're at the gate and they're playing this game. What's 3 times 10? 30. What's 2 plus 2? 4. I'm going to keep my arithmetic real easy for the sake of this example. Now, when their friend finally shows up, they're watching, they see them come in through the gate, excitement goes really high. The other friend says, what's 3 times 5? This is another moment where answering the question, playing the game, is just not as important. It's so exciting to see that person that they've missed for so long that it's unlikely in that moment you would respond. Next, we're going to talk about confusion in training. Apologies if the quality of this photo is not great. I just love this meme of this golden retriever. I have no idea what I'm doing, doing chemistry. Sometimes in training, our dogs feel this way. They aren't sure what we're asking them to do. Some dogs get frustrated, some dogs will keep trying, and some humans feel like their dog is not listening. Now, when we're training, we're teaching English as a second language to our dogs. They don't know what the word sit means until we teach them what the word sit means. And sometimes we start off on a really good track, but we don't continue that track long enough for them to fully understand the meaning of that word. So I want to talk about a few things that I find make it harder for our dogs to listen or understand what we're actually saying. So first, I want to talk about poisoned cues. And this is just a term we use to describe a word or a hand signal that we give the dog that doesn't get the response we want. So it could be that that word means 2 different things to the dog and the person. I know someone with a large dog who prefers laying down to sitting. My dog actually could fit into that group. And when they said the word sit, their dog would lay down. To their dog, the word sit meant lay down. Now, a really good example, one of my favorite examples, is the word drop. Because for a lot of dogs, if we haven't put in a lot of work teaching them that the word drop means spit out what's in your mouth and something really good will happen to you, the word drop might start to mean clench down and run away. So if we're in that situation, it's important to do a little bit of retraining. Another reason we might end up with a poisoned cue is if a single word means multiple things. Now, dogs can understand that multiple words mean one thing. So for example, you could teach a dog that the word lay means lie down on the floor. And you could teach that same dog that the word down also means lie down on the floor. They might be a little confused at first, but that concept is something that a dog can grasp. Both these words mean the same thing. What is much harder for dogs is to understand that one word means 2 different things. And my favorite example of this is the word down. So down might mean lay down on the floor. But if down also means get off the counter, there can be a lot of confusion for our dogs when we say down and they're not on the counter. It's going to be harder for them to then think, oh, I should lay down on the floor, because that word means multiple things. That concept is much harder for our dogs. Finally, a poison cue can happen when that cue predicts something the dog does not like. Now, it is up to the dog what is perceived as bad. So we might not be yelling at them or telling them they're bad, but if our cue consistently predicts something they don't like, it is very likely they will stop responding to the cue. Effectively, the cue becomes punished. My favorite example of this is actually recall, so coming when called. And I see this happen most often when somebody has a fenced backyard that their dog runs in, and then they call their dog to them and close the door behind them so they no longer have access to the backyard. If come predictably means you no longer have access to the backyard, dogs very quickly stop responding to that cue. Now, another reason your dog might be confused in training or not really understand what we're asking of them is if we lump criteria. So criteria is what it takes for the dog to earn the reward. And lumping simply means that we combine too many things together or we take too large of a step forward. I'm going to pause for a moment because I see there's a question here. So we have a dog. There can be minimal to no distractions at the time, just looking straight at them, not moving, and won't listen to what they're asking them to do. Just looks at her until she starts moving toward him. Then he starts running around the room grabbing things, such as bed, sweaters, things that don't belong to him, is running away like it's a game. Why does he get so worked up and act out like this? Oh, this is a really good question. So from this, I'm getting the dog might not understand what we're asking them to do. So they're sitting there. There's not any distractions. They're watching you. We ask them to do something. We take a step forward towards the dog, and the dog takes off running and grabbing things and running around with them. Running off and grabbing things and running around with them sounds like a couple of possibilities to me. One is we have an attention-seeking behavior. When I grab your things, it gets your attention. But here in your description, you say that the dog is looking at you already and you are looking at them. We're paying attention to each other already. So in this case, it could be that that step forward is a little bit of stress. So we're asking the dog to do something. They might not fully understand what we're asking. We step forward and the dog moves into this goofy attitude. We get this run around, we're playing. That is used to diffuse the situation. So we call it a displacement behavior. Now, it's hard to tell, and we'd have to kind of look at this from a few different situations to see. What I would do is look for the body language in the moment and consider what the dog understands in that moment. So if they're looking straight at you, not moving, won't listen to what you're asking them to do. I think about, is what I'm asking them to do too complex, too difficult? What we might do is take a step back and then ask for something that is simpler for the dog. This could be an example of what we call lumping, as we're talking about in this slide, where perhaps the dog has practiced sit a few times and been rewarded, and now we're asking the dog to sit on a new surface, or we're asking the dog to stay, but the dog has never stayed for as long as we're asking. It's possible that there's lack of generalization that we're going to talk about in the next slide as well. But Mitchell, if you have more questions on this, please jump in and ask more questions. We have a hand up. Oh, perfect. I would love to have you talk about it.
Hey, okay, so there's a few things with that situation because it'll be all the time. If I'm going upstairs, he's not allowed to come upstairs at the moment, and it's blocked off, and I'll ask him to go lay down, and he'll just stand there until I start coming towards him, like walking down, because he's just staring at me the whole time, and I'll keep asking him to go lay down just so I can go up and get a couple things done and come back down. And he'll just stand there and stare at me and either run away and grab a bunch of stuff and run around the room, or he'll run right over to his bed and lay down. Like he's just waiting for me to come to him before he does what I want him to do. Like I'm not in the room anymore, so he doesn't feel like he needs to listen to me, it seems like.
Oh, yeah. So that is a very interesting point. And I think that you kind of hit it on the nose there with, I'm no longer in the room. And so one of the things that can happen with the dog is it's part of these, actually the 3 Ds of difficulty. So here we have duration, distance, and distraction. I love your question, is fitting perfectly into my slide, so thank you. What I think is happening is go lay down has meaning when you're in the room with him. But when you step out of the room, what's happened is there is now a barrier, a threshold between you. And so for the dog who hasn't practiced go lay down on your bed with different thresholds between you, or with you standing in different locations, won't necessarily understand that cue anymore. And the act of turning and walking away can feel like a releaser from the behavior for a lot of dogs. So for example, if our dog is laying down and staying in bed and we turn and walk away, if the dog has not been trained slowly and repetitively to practice staying put as we turn or turn and walk away, they might think, okay, cool, the behavior's done. I did it. I'm done. I laid down on my bed. So in this situation, especially when it's happening in those times where we go out of the room, I think we could benefit from some practice. So is there a point where he does listen to go lay down?
If there's food involved, absolutely. He'll sit wherever I ask him to stay for as long as I say to.
Okay, yeah, great.
So I do, like, when I'm feeding him, I make him sit down and I make him wait, and I'll put his food down and he'll just sit there and wait until I tell him, good boy, go ahead. And then he goes right at it. But I can make him sit there for an hour if I wanted to. As long as there's food involved, he'll do anything you want. But when there's not food involved, he doesn't care about what I'm saying.
Yeah. There's a slide a little later on where we're going to talk about motivation. So jumping kind of to that topic, if food is a strong reinforcer for him, he's like, I will sit here all day long if you've got a bowl of food in front of me that I'm working for. What I think about is have a little less food in that bowl and a little more food in your pocket. And I like it in a pocket or a pouch or in a jar around the house. And what I want to start doing is surprising the dog with my ability to have food on my person. I don't want to have the food right in front of his nose. So I don't want to be holding food every time, asking him to do the behavior.
I'll kind of secretly hide it in my pocket.
Yeah. And he's going to know about it at first because he can smell it. He's going to know there's food present.
Oh, yep. I just said food and his ears perked up and
he definitely knows that word. What I think about doing is I start with a really simple behavior. Typically, a lot of dogs know sit. They've practiced sit a lot. That would be the one that I would start with most likely. And what I would do is I would have your bowl of food not visible. So it could be that same bowl of food in that same period of time where he's practiced before, keeping things as similar as usual, but have that food not in sight. Ask him to sit. If he doesn't sit the first time you use your verbal cue, the next thing I'll do is give a hand signal. And the hand signal for sit usually looks like an open palm moving up. If you have one that you typically use with him, you can use that one.
Oh yeah, I just kind of like point over him at his butt, and he always sits down when I ask him to. It's just when I'm trying to do something, he's like, "Oh, you're not paying attention to me anymore, so now I'm not going to listen." Yeah.
We have to build in the reward for doing it even when you're not paying attention. So I start with that sit cue with no food visible. And once he does it, I'll say, good. And then I'll grab the food and I'll feed him food. And we want that food to get in there within a few seconds. So usually we want it within 5 seconds, as fast as possible after we go, good. And he'll start to learn you can pull food out of anywhere. You know, I practice in that environment where he's done it very well. If he does sit wherever, then I start practicing having him sit when there's no visible treats, and I magically produce food. I like to have jars around my house or a container of treats in cupboards in each room, so I don't have to have it on my person necessarily. But I ask the dog to do a behavior, and all of a sudden I'm following through with these treats they didn't even know I had. Suddenly they have this motivation to do it. They're like, wow, he must know. Like he knows that something good is around, and so I should probably listen. And then I start building in that I'm not paying as much attention part. So if the dog can sit and if they can stay for just a second in front of you, you can start to build by splitting criteria. So lumping versus splitting criteria in training. Lumping means we go from the dog sat down and they got a treat for it, very simple, to the dog sat down and I turn and walk away. The dog is probably going to get up. So what I'll start is I will split my criteria into small pieces. The dog sat down and I moved my foot and I said, good, and I got them a treat. The dog is sitting and I take a couple steps, good, and I get them a treat. The dog is sitting and I start to turn my head away from them, good, and I get them a treat. And I break down all these little steps for the dog of what that behavior eventually should look like. Because the dogs actually have a very hard time going from I sat down and I'm staying with my person right here to I sat down and I'm staying while my person is no longer paying attention. Or in your case, going to go lay down on the bed. And so this splitting is what can create a really strong behavior, especially when we have one that's, a little hit or miss. He listens sometimes, but mostly only if there's food right there. He'll listen if we're paying a lot of attention, but that piece of your attention waning, for him, it's a releaser. He says, okay, he's done, I'm done. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I'll have a couple more as we go on too.
Okay, perfect, good, I'm glad. I'm gonna go ahead and mute you and lower your hand, but feel free to raise it again if you have any other questions, or feel free to type into that chat box as well. Thanks for asking. Okay, so the last thing with this lumping and splitting criteria that we want to think about, and that was a really great example, are the 3 Ds of difficulty. So I talked about how moving away from your dog or your attention turning away from the dog can make it harder for the dog to do the behavior. We consider duration, distance, and distraction, these 3 Ds. Everything will get harder for your dog with duration, distance, and distraction. And I often think of these when considering the behavior stay. So if I want my dog to lay down on her bed and stay there, which I often do, especially if I'm cooking, I prefer my dog in the kitchen to be laying on her bed where I'm not going to accidentally spill boiling water or anything on her. She learned this in very small pieces. So first she learned how to go lay down on her bed. And that started with me patting her bed. She walked over there and stepped on her bed and she got a treat for that. She sat down on the bed and she got a treat for that. She laid down on the bed, she got a treat for that. Then we started to build duration. So I would feed her a treat every few seconds she stayed in bed. And I slowly started to build the amount of time. So it started with every few seconds you get treats, and then it built to, it takes anywhere between 5 and 10 seconds for mom to feed you a treat. 5 and 15 seconds. Now we're going anywhere between 10 seconds and 20 or 30 seconds until we built to you get a treat every minute or so. And then eventually you get a treat at the very end of my cooking process. But we did that duration practice with me standing right in front of her until she was comfortable laying there for about 15 or 30 seconds. So when she could lay there for 15 or 30 seconds with me standing right in front of her, we switched and practiced distance. And when I start practicing distance, how far I am away from the dog while they're performing the behavior, I drop duration. We want to work on these 3 Ds separately. Think of them as completely different concepts for your dog. So when I started working on distance, she's laying on her bed. I take half a step away from her and immediately go, good, and give her a treat. I'm not waiting that 15 or 30 seconds that she can do with me standing right in front of her, because now I'm working on a different type of difficulty. I think of this like learning to play the piano and learning to speak Spanish. I'm not going to try and learn the piano in Spanish first thing. that's going to be way too complex. I need to learn the words in Spanish and learn how to read that first. I need to learn how to read music first before I can combine those two things. And then the third one here is distraction, which we talked a little bit about in our last slide, where if there is something really distracting in the environment, it's much harder for our dogs to perform the behavior we're asking them. So here, I'll start to add in small distractions. Once the dog is comfortable staying in place as I move around the room, and we've started to pair together our distance and duration, you can stay in place as I move around the room for about 30 seconds. Then I'll add in little distractions, such as picking something up, pulling out ingredients, taking out my pots and pans in this case, until the dog is perfectly content to lay in that bed while I'm moving around cooking a meal. Now, for my dog, since cooking a meal is a pretty long process, I typically will give her something to do while she's laying in her bed. I want her to be really happy about performing the behavior, and I don't really like stopping every minute or two to touch dog food while I'm cooking, so she'll often get a licky mat or a Kong or something that she can work on while she's laying there so that she's having a really good time performing the behavior. But anytime I notice that perhaps the behavior is breaking down at a certain point, they can lay down and stay, but as soon as I turn away from them, they're getting up. I want to work on that piece of the training so that they understand stay means stay, even as my back turns. And the way we do that is by simply starting with those little splits in criteria, very incrementally building until the dog is very strong in each part of the behavior. For us, sit down and stay there feels like one easy thing. For the dog, it has very many components in it. They don't understand the long game, the whole goal of please don't be underfoot while I'm cooking. For them, all of these little things we do are moments where they're wondering, was that a cue for me to get up? Am I supposed to still be here? Is this even worth my time? Which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next few slides as we think about other things that make it hard for our dogs to listen to us. So generalization is a big one. And we've discussed this a little bit already, where if you take your dog to a different location or if something in the environment changes, say you walk through that threshold and now you're going up the stairs, asking your dog to do the behavior, they might not understand what we're asking. For the dog, learning is very context dependent. And what that means is they're looking at that picture, at that whole view, at everything in front of them. And that is part of their learning process. So here you have an image of me with this kind of brownish orange background and Fluffy, my fake dog buddy, on my side. And you can see me sitting here and gesturing with my hands. If you were a dog and I was teaching you how to sit while doing this, this background, this fake dog, my posture and my hand movements would all be part of that behavior for you. So if we changed what that looked like, for example, if we just rotate it to the side and now there's a window here, this can look completely different to the dog. The word sit that they learned with this background doesn't mean the same thing to them as the word sit with this background. Now, this is because dogs are very, very good at distinguishing details. Their brain is looking for these small changes in the environment that helps them determine what is safe and what is dangerous, what is fun, what is happy, what is scary. And they're not great at generalizing. They don't spread that concept around. Whereas for humans, if this were the background when I taught you the word sit, this would have nothing to do with that word for you, most likely. And you would still understand what sit means if the background behind me changed. The dog's brains function a little differently in this way. So if you are in perhaps a new environment, or if you're practicing training in a different room of your house, or you've gone out to the park and you're asking your dog to do behaviors, the first thing I ask if the dog doesn't respond immediately is, has your dog practiced that behavior in this context? If they haven't practiced the behavior in this context, then I'm going to go back several steps in the training process. I might even start with a little treat in front of their nose to guide them to sit, re-teaching them in that new environment. I have this saying that I give in my classes. It's a fake statistic. You can't find it anywhere. It's not from the scientific literature. But I like to say a dog never truly knows a behavior until they've practiced it 200 times in 20 different locations. That's just my imaginary number ballpark for a dog fully understanding what a word means. Now, Dr. Ian Dunbar is a very famous positive reinforcement dog trainer. He's sometimes referred to as the father of positive reinforcement training. He did this little project with some trainers that I like to refer to as the sit test. He had a seminar full of professional dog trainers, very skilled people, whose dogs were all very skilled. It was a workshop where the dogs were there. And he asked the room, whose dog knows what the word sit means? And every single trainer raised their hand. They were like, yes, we've taught our dogs sit. They all know that one. That's the first thing we often teach. And then he asked if somebody was willing to come up and demonstrate on stage, and somebody came up with their dog, a professional trainer, said the word sit, and the dog sat. And everyone said, yeah, of course the dog knows the word sit. They've practiced this. They've practiced this a lot of places. Then Dr. Ian Dunbar asked that person to turn their back to their dog and ask their dog to sit. And this trainer turns away from their dog and says, sit. And the dog looks around confused. Because although they had practiced in many different environments, they had never practiced with their back to the dog. And the word sit coming from their person's back did not mean the same thing to the dog. They no longer understood what that meant. And I love this example because we don't always think about teaching our dog to do the behavior when we're in different positions. I actually like to teach my dog how to do the behavior no matter what position I'm in. So for my dog who's deaf, we have our hand signal. This means sit. I practice this when I'm sitting on the floor. I practice this when I'm kneeling. I practice it when I'm standing. I practice it laying on the couch. I practice it laying on the floor. So no matter what my body is doing, if I need my dog to sit for some reason, which I rarely need her to sit, but if I wanted her to sit, I could do my hand signal, and she would likely understand that because we had practiced in all of those different contexts. Now, the outside environment tends to be a really big one that makes it difficult for dogs to generalize. So you've maybe practiced sit or stay or lay on your bed in all different environments of your house. Maybe you've practiced it at the vet's office or at a pet store. But that first time you go out to a park and you ask your dog to sit right away, that can be a very difficult moment. And it's difficult for a lot of reasons. The first one is because the environment is constantly changing. So it's difficult to generalize to an outdoor environment, which smells different every day. It might look different every day, especially right now in the spring as we have green starting to pop up everywhere. And it sounds different every day. The wind blows from different directions, different animals are moving around. So practicing in outdoor environments and working at a low level, a level where your dog can understand still, maybe with you saying the word sit and then giving a hand signal. So they have multiple cues. Maybe using your treat a couple of times at the very beginning to help them out with the behavior, and then putting that treat away in your pocket and using just your hand so that we don't become reliant on that food right in front of the nose, can help them get to a point where they understand that behavior in that environment. In a couple of slides, we're going to talk about the other difficulties about working in environments such as outside, specifically your dog's motivations when they're out there. Because sometimes that piece of food we brought with us just cannot compete with what's in the environment. And we'll talk about how we can get our food or our excitement or our play to compete with those environmental distractions. Now, I really wanted to talk about medical reasons as well, because anytime we're looking at a dog who is not responding or a behavior that we're trying to work on with our dog, medical is something we really want to rule out first. So the first thing I think about is, can they actually perceive the cue? Now, I already gave away the punchline to this story because I mentioned that my dog is deaf. But the day that I brought her home from the shelter, I noticed she wasn't paying any attention to anything I said. She wouldn't look at me when I talked. She wasn't engaging with me very much. And I had a theory that perhaps she didn't know that I was making noises. And at one point I dropped my phone and I saw her startle, and so I wasn't really sure. Maybe she could hear. And what I found out was that she had really bad chronic ear infections. So she had severe auditory impairment. She is almost 100% deaf. She occasionally will hear a sound or two. Depending on the pressure outside, we'll get good hearing days where her ears are all of a sudden a swivel. I'm like, wow, you can hear today. But not being able to perceive the cue is a reason a dog won't listen. If I had expected her to sit when I said the word sit that first day when she came home with me, there is no way that would have happened because she could not perceive that I was saying that. Another thing is visual impairment. It seems like it would be really obvious when a dog is visually impaired, but we do run into situations where the dog has become very good at navigating the environment. So especially a dog who loses their eyesight or whose eyesight becomes impaired when they are very young or are born with visual impairments, they can navigate the world quite well. And it can be difficult to know that they actually cannot see very well until we start to try and use visual signals. If you're trying to use a hand signal and the dog is not responding to it, or if your dog doesn't always seem to recognize who you are, that could be an indicator that your dog is having issues with sight. Maybe your dog is trained with hand signals and they do really well with it, but as light gets low in the evening, they no longer are responding. Your dog could be having a hard time seeing in low light. Now, other medical reasons a dog might not respond could be pain or acute injury. We can look out for this by noticing signs such as not wanting to get up when they've been lying down, or perhaps they groan when they lie down, or creak when they stand up. My dog has arthritis, so when she stands up, you can hear like of her joints. When she lays down, she often goes, because it hurts for her to do those things. You might have a dog who's walking with you and they stop and refuse to go forward. We sometimes see this in puppies who are experiencing growing pains. We'll see this in dogs who have more acute injuries or even chronic injuries, such as hip dysplasia, where walking is painful, so they cannot perform the heel that we might be asking them to do. It actually hurts them. You might notice them hesitating when you ask for a behavior. So for example, if you ask your dog to sit and they used to sit right away, but now they back up a little bit or are slow to lower their butt, it could be pain that they're experiencing that's making it hard for them to respond to our cue. And another place we see this is jumping into cars. Now, if your dog doesn't jump up onto things ever, or doesn't jump into cars, or more specifically, a big red flag is if they used to and now they won't. For example, my dog with her arthritis, she's an older dog. She used to jump into bed to cuddle all the time. Now there are days where she will not jump into bed. It's too high, it's too hard on her. So we removed the bed frame and put the mattress on the floor. Now it's easy to get on the bed because my dog is allowed in the bed. She likes to snuggle, and there is no scientific evidence that letting your dog in the bed causes any bad behavior. And I can promise you it doesn't, because she is very good when she snuggles. If you suspect your dog has some sort of injury or is experiencing pain, Or even if you suspect your dog has some sort of auditory or visual impairment, it's a very good idea to reach out to your vet. Your vet is going to be the person who's going to know how to help you through that. Any sort of medical issue that causes the dog to have difficulty doing a behavior, the vet needs to be on board with and understand what's happening. They're the ones that help us treat pain. They're the ones that can identify injury. So I do encourage you to reach out if you think that might be what's going on with your dog. And then lastly, as we're talking about why dogs don't listen to us, a big one that most people think, at least at first, is the reason their dog is not listening is because the dog doesn't want to. So there are lots of reasons a dog might not want to listen to us. Now, we talked about a few of them, like our cue actually predicts something they don't like, or they don't understand what we're asking them. But here is where we have a situation where the dog hears us, they perceive what we're saying. They're not overly stressed or overly distracted. Perhaps they're out in a field and they're sniffing something, and we're a few feet away and we call them to us. And they look at you and they just don't do it. And they turn and do whatever they want. Now here we have an issue with motivation. And this is often construed as the dog being stubborn, but the dog actually has no reason necessarily to do the behavior. For a long time, it was thought dogs should listen to us because we are their masters, we are their people, they should listen to us out of respect. But if your boss asks you to do something for nothing, no matter how much you respect them, you may or may not want to do that. It depends on how motivating it is. Now, if your boss usually gives you a bonus when you've done extra work, or if your boss pays overtime for those extra projects, yeah, sure, absolutely, I might be able to do that. But if there's not anything in it for you, and especially if it's repeatedly asked and there's nothing in it for you, it is very unlikely that you will continue to do that for them. So motivation has a lot to do with what's called the matching law. And this is a very old scientific concept that describes how behavior is motivated through reinforcement. Now, the matching law is an idea that behaviors that are reinforced increase in frequency, with the caveat that those behaviors need to be reinforced with a value of reinforcer that's high enough that it's worth the effort. That reinforcer should match close to what the dog wants. And the reinforcement rate, how frequently they get the reinforcement, needs to be high enough that it's worth it for them to continue. Finally, when an animal is deciding between two behaviors, whichever behavior has a strongest reinforcement history is the likely behavior that they'll do. So reinforcement history could be described as a tally of the number of treats you've gotten for doing the behavior. Or it could be described as the number of times you've received any form of reinforcement for that behavior compared to another behavior. And I have a little example here with these just abstract shapes. And here I'm using them as a measure of attention. So attention can be very reinforcing to a lot of dogs. Here we have 3 behaviors the dog practices during greetings. Sitting is one of them. And we see it gets the dog a little bit of attention. In the history of the dog practicing greetings, this has paid off this amount of attention. Licking, when they lick the person, that person tends to squiggle and move their head away or push the dog down. Both of those are forms of attention. And so licking has received a little bit more attention. Because when the dog sits, they get a little attention and the people go on conversing. But when the dog licks, the people have a harder time ignoring the dog and the dog gets more attention. And then finally we have jumping. And jumping gets the most attention. Maybe the person pets them all over their body and talks to them all sweet because they're happy that the dog jumped. Maybe the person says no and pushes the dog down repeatedly, or pops a knee up on them and says no, bad. and push them down. Even that negative attention, what we would describe as negative, no, bad, pushing the dog down, is a form of attention. And for a dog who is attention seeking, that is still a form of reinforcement. So here, for this particular dog, when they are greeting, the most likely behavior they are to perform is jumping, because jumping receives the most attention for them. Even though perhaps they only ever get treats for sitting, if attention is what they're seeking, that is what's going to be most reinforcing for the dog. The dog is the one that gets to decide what is reinforcement, because reinforcement and reward are not equivalent. A reward is something you give the animal because they did the thing you wanted. Reinforcement is something that an animal experiences that increases the frequency of the behavior they performed. So in this situation, treats might not be reinforcing, but attention is very reinforcing. So for this dog, if we wanted to modify it so that they listened when we asked them to sit instead of licking us or jumping on us, we would want to start providing a lot of attention for sitting. The dog sits, oh, you're so good, you're so good, you're so good. Yeah, hi, it's great to see you. You could crouch down on their level and give them that attention. And we want to practice this, thinking about our lumping and our splitting that we talked about before, in lower excitement situations, maybe not at the door, not on first greeting, until the dog is really, really good at sitting and knows sitting gets them all the attention. Then we could start asking them to sit in more distracting or difficult situations, such as in the doorway, but maybe not when you first get home. And then practicing when you do first get home, asking the dog to sit and giving all the attention when the dog sits. We also want to try not to reinforce licking and jumping, because if attention happens for all three of these behaviors, our reinforcement history is already stacked for licking and jumping. So if we're reinforcing all of them, licking and jumping will continue. So we want to make sure that either the dog is not capable of practicing licking and jumping, perhaps they're behind a gate when you first greet them, or somebody is holding them on leash for the greeting, so they're at a distance where they can't practice putting their paws up on the body or licking somebody. And we want to reward that sit with lots of attention. Now, if we don't set it up so that the dog isn't practicing and the dog is practicing jumping or licking, we would want to not give them attention in those moments and instead give them all the attention when they sit. Sitting earns you a lot of attention. You get reinforcement for sitting. The history of reinforcement for sitting builds, and that behavior becomes more likely to happen in the future. This is just one example of how reinforcement histories change our dog's behavior and predict our dog's behavior. One of my favorites when we think about the matching law and reinforcement histories is when it comes to prey drive. Prey drive is not a very scientific concept. You can't actually measure that drive in a dog, but it is that idea that the dog wants to chase and hunt prey. And now I've mentioned before, Janora, my dog, wants to hunt cats. She's very interested in hunting cats. She likes to hunt small animals. She likes to stalk them and chase them. And I recently got some chickens. So I now have chickens on my property, and their fence line is near the dog's yard. So I needed to teach her not to chase chickens. Now, chasing chickens is really fun. There's a few things I could do to help set her up for success. First, we set it up so she couldn't practice chasing chickens. There is a fence as well as an exercise pen. So she's got some distance from the chickens. She can't get close enough to get them to run. So she's not practicing that behavior. We are reducing that opportunity for the reinforcement history of chasing chickens to grow. I want a reinforcement history for a different behavior. If I had an active dog without arthritis, I would be giving them an outlet for those natural predatory behaviors. you like to chase this toy. If your dog has 100 experiences chasing and catching a ball, or chasing and catching a rope toy on the end of a stick. So if you've ever heard of a flirt pole, it's a PVC pipe with a rope run through it and then a dog toy attached to the end. You can move it around as if it were a prey animal, and your dog can chase and grab and catch it. I want the dog to have that outlet, chase down that prey, and have lots of fun experiences chasing and catching that object. If catching the prey is what reinforces the dog, then if they have caught 100 balls and 0 chickens, when faced with, should I chase a ball or a chicken? It is likely the dog will chase the ball, because their reinforcement history for that is stronger than for chasing chickens. Now, in Genora's case, she does not actually understand how to play. She has no interest in chasing balls. Her arthritis keeps her from wanting to chase after a flirt pole, although she does like to destroy the squeakers in them. So we are using treats, and what she has learned is calm behavior around the chickens gets her tons of treats. She's never had so many treats in the backyard. The backyard used to mean you get a treat if you go poop out there. Now it means you get 10 different treats just for laying down while you see chickens moving. And I use dog food grade treats for this with her to keep her weight down, so that we're not using 1,000 treats and having very little food intake. She's getting dog food as these treats, but it is a different dog food than the food she gets in the house. She's getting some extra special dehydrated duck dog food. So when she sees chickens now, the most reinforced behavior is to lay down and just calmly watch them. And that's the behavior she practices. Even as the chickens are running around in their yard, or if I go in and I'm training with the chickens, because chickens are actually very fun to train. It follows all the rules of dog training, but you also have to pay attention to the fact that they are a prey species. So their motivation will be a little bit different, more fear. Genora lays down on the other side of the fence and calmly waits, because she knows little bits of dehydrated duck dog food are going to be coming her way. This is one of the ways we teach dogs also how to recall off of items that are really exciting. So, for example, dogs were teaching how to come to us even when they see a deer running. By using the matching law, we want to make sure that our reinforcement is worth the same amount as that fun chase after a deer. And our director of training, Kate Wilson, has a good story about her dog, Della, who loves hot dogs, but if there's a deer running in the woods, she could care less about hot dogs. Hot dogs are just not as good as chasing a deer. So what Kate used was tug, a predatory game, and chasing after toys. But the history of chasing after toys, of playing tug, is so reinforcing to her. It's so fun, and she has such a strong history of chasing after toys and playing tug, that when she sees a deer and she gets all excited and starts to run towards the deer, Kate can call her over and she'll turn and run right back, because the reinforcer is worth the effort of stopping that chase. It has a greater reinforcement history. It's meeting all the same needs as chasing after the prey, where she can chase after another kind of prey. And she knows she's going to succeed. So that's a lot on motivation. And I think this is a really important thing to keep in mind, because for our dogs who appear stubborn, they have a reason that they're not doing the behaviors we ask. And that's one of the reasons why I recommend having treats around the house. If the behavior doesn't pay off for the animal, following the laws of learning, they will not continue to do that behavior. Now, if we meet an animal's needs, all of their needs are met, and we predict really great things, there are a lot of dogs who will work for attention, for love, for pets. There are dogs out there that don't need a treat every single time or a toy every single time, but they are fewer and further between than most people think. So by providing your dog with something each time they do the behavior, we build up that reinforcement history and stack the odds in our favor. So last and not least, a few tips on building really effective communication with our dogs, because that's what it all comes down to. If our dogs aren't listening, something has gone wrong with our communication. Either they're not getting the message, we're not transmitting the message in a way that they can understand, it's not worth it to them, the environment is too much for them to be able to respond, there's a medical reason they can't do what we're asking or can't perceive what we're asking, or it's simply not worth it to them in that moment, we can modify these things by going at the pace of our learner so that we build on the training we've started in little incremental steps, splitting criteria so that they can be successful and learn each step. You can think of it like math. I talked about some basic arithmetic, lower level math. Calculus is higher level math. We don't take our human students from arithmetic, their addition and subtraction tables, to calculus overnight. There are many different steps between there. Setting it up so that our motivations are aligned, reinforcing what we want to see, managing the environment so they don't practice behaviors we don't want them to practice, so that they don't build up a reinforcement history for a behavior we'd rather not see. Making sure any behavior we ask for, we're ready to reinforce in some way. I want to make sure that either I have a treat within reach, I have some sort of toy that they love to play with, or I've taught my dog that petting and attention are well worth doing those behaviors. And for some dogs, it does take teaching them, pairing that fun petting and playing with other things they like so that they actually really like that too. So that if I ask them the behavior, it's worth it for them to do it. If your cue that you've been working on is poisoned, the word drop means clench down and run, then teach a new cue. Start from scratch. Start to teach them that the word out means spit out what's ever in your mouth. By restarting, you set them up to learn a new behavior and to understand really what you're asking of them. It happens to the best of us that we accidentally poison a cue. I used to have a recall cue with my dog. It was a kissy noise. I would go. It was one of the few noises she could hear. She could no longer hear it, which isn't one reason I would have to change that cue. But I accidentally poisoned that cue because I would use this cue as an example of a dog who had learned a really strong recall, and I would make that noise while she was asleep, and she would get up and come running over to me, and I'd give her a treat for it. As it turns out, the effort to wake herself, jump up, and run over was not worth that treat I gave her. And so when I went over time, she'd just look at me and be like, no way. I know that means nothing good enough. This is going to be too much work. And so she stopped responding to that one. And I had to teach her a new cue to come to me. Trying to retrain the same cue, which has already been poisoned, is much harder than teaching a new cue. So if the word sit means lay down, or the word drop means run away, it works much better to simply start from the beginning and reteach than to try and change the meaning of a cue that means something else to the dog. And finally, be a consistent predictor of great things for your dog. If you're always ready with a treat and a smile and some play, your dog is going to really want to know what you're saying. They'll want to understand those cues. And this takes time and building of the relationship. So with a new dog or with a dog who's been spending some time confused, it's not going to be tomorrow that all of a sudden they're listening to everything we say. And I'll let you know, my dog does not listen to everything I say because I am a human and I am not always prepared. But like I said, when I poison a cue like I did with my recall, I change it. I make a new one. And we want to set it up so that our motivations are aligned as much as possible. I want her to have all the good things in life. And if she knows that, she's going to want all the good things for me too. So building that really strong cooperative relationship sets us up for success in having our dogs listen. I see Lori has raised her hand. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. Hey.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good. I just had two, I think, quick questions. For the consistent reinforcement, is that something that we're doing until they learn the behavior, so when they're younger, until we're on the same page? Or is this something that we're always reinforcing? Is it a lifelong thing? You know, we always reinforce even after they're not puppies or even after they've mastered or learned the behavior really well?
Oh, I love this question. So there has been debate over time in the scientific training community. It used to be thought that we start with rewarding every single time, and then we fade to a variable reinforcement schedule where we just reward sometimes in order to maintain the behavior. This was considered like a slot machine method where you're going to keep going because sometimes there's a big payout, even if it's not always a big payout. But what we found is that works really well under lab settings where, say, you're a dolphin in a tank, or unfortunately, it's usually beagles in a laboratory setting. But when you're in the real world, the environment is constantly changing. And so we find that when we switch to this more intermittent reinforcement, the behavior actually weakens and the dog will do it less often. I think about it like a pop machine that sometimes works and sometimes steals your quarter.
Okay.
You might keep trying, but you're probably going to get pretty frustrated with it too. So I will reinforce every time. It doesn't mean I'm going to give a treat every time necessarily. And it doesn't mean that the behavior sit always gets you a treat. What we do is we create more complex behaviors from the simple ones. So that go lay down on your bed started with just patting the bed and you stepping on it gets a treat, and turned into you lay down on your bed and you hang out there for 30 minutes and then you get a treat. So we make the behaviors more complex, but we still reinforce them. And again, it doesn't have to be food either. So by adding in different kinds of reinforcers, such as sniffing a new place, or getting to go out the door, or getting some time to snuggle in bed, you can reinforce the behaviors with real life reinforcers. What other question did you have?
When you were back early on talking about the dog going up to the fence and sometimes they're over threshold, and so that is why they're not responding because they can't hear you. Yeah. And then you had said that if you walk up to them, you might even startle them. Do you have a good suggestion for the best way to maybe get them to, you know, stop engaging or stop reacting to that while not necessarily startling them? And even though they can't listen to you, is there another like better way to get their attention besides like maybe getting louder or doing, you know what I mean? Like, what do you do? Okay.
Yeah, this is a great question. There's a few things I do. First, I want to prepare the dog for that situation if it's something that's going to happen. So if I know that there's nothing I can do and the dog is going to experience that stimuli, I will practice recall away from the fence hundreds of times when there is not a stimulus there.
Oh, okay.
And that way they have this really strong reinforcement history of coming away from the fence. So if, say, the dog is getting just a hint of what we're saying, even if they're over threshold, they might be able to tell that we're trying to say something. That behavior itself is so heavily reinforced, we have kind of a foot in the door. We might be able to get them to come away to our voice. My number one thing, though, is going to be to try and set it up so they don't experience that level of stimulation. So perhaps if I know there's a dog next door and my dog reacts to the dog next door on the other side of the fence line, I might create a visual barrier so they're not looking at each other, which takes away one of the things that makes it intense. I might have my dog on leash so they can't actually go right up to the fence. Or like I did with the chickens, I'll create a temporary second fence inside. It decreases the amount of space the dog has, but you can do that by just a couple of feet. And that little bit of extra room can set it up so they're not quite as far over threshold. So that they aren't practicing the behavior as much, and so that they might be a little bit more likely to hear us.
Okay, what did you use to make the second fence? Just a offline, one of those fences like you get on Amazon?
Yeah, good question. So you can do that. There is something called Pet Playgrounds that has a good fence. They're a little bit expensive. What we used is welded wire and T-posts. So you use a fence post driver, drive the T-posts into the ground, run the welded wire. It's a big roll. You unroll it, and you can create a relatively cheap secondary fence. We had a 100-foot fence that we put in with that cost, I think, a little under $100.
Wow. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's a good deal. It is not something that's going to be very secure. So it's not something that I would consider my major barrier. I would want two. But it works really well for a temporary fence, and it's actually what the chicken yard is made of as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. I'm going to have Danielle next because you're the next one I saw. Oops.
Hi.
Hi.
So, our dog, he's really good at drop or pretty good at give in the house, any of his toys. And if he has something he shouldn't have, he's pretty good. But when we go outside on a walk and he gets something that he shouldn't have, sometimes he'll listen, but other times he will get that clenched jaw and will not want to give or drop. Sometimes it takes both of us to open his mouth. And we've tried a treat or a ball, and he's just like, nope, this is what I'm going to have. So what are your recommendations on trying? Because we've tried lots of things.
Yeah, this is such a good question. It is kind of a tricky situation. What I like to do is set up practice rounds with items outside. So I'll start by taking out like a toy, and I'll practice with the toy. So have the dog take the toy in their mouth and practice your give behavior so that they're building up a history of doing it in that environment to help take care of our generalization problem.
Okay.
The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start to set up sort of like decoy items that the dog might pick up that are safe. So something that I'm not going to worry about the dog hurting themselves on or swallowing immediately and having a surgery because of. I'll set up something that I think the dog is probably going to pick up. Maybe it's a dog toy they've never seen. And I'll practice with that item where it's safe. It's an item that's not such high value that they're likely to run off with it or not do it. Since we've already practiced clenching the jaw down, I might consider a new cue because that cue might be poisoned outside. It might not have the same meaning outside as it does inside. One thing that I will practice also is reinforcing those choices not to grab the things. So to get ahead of it, to manage the environment, I might set up some items at a distance where I know where they are, and I'll have my leash at such a distance that the dog's not going to access the item. They might smell it, but I won't move my feet for them to follow. I'm not going to pull them back either, though. I'm going to wait for them to make the choice to move on, and I'll reinforce that choice.
Okay.
So we've got a couple things happening at once. We practice our give outside with an item they know how to do it with. We start practicing with a random item that's safe, that they can pick up, that we know they're likely going to give. And we start to reward when they just don't pick the things up.
Okay.
I also want my reinforcer to be high enough value. So what's valuable inside is not the same as what's valuable outside. If we're using dog food inside, we might need boiled chicken or hot dogs or little bits of cheese outside to kind of compete with what's out there.
Right. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, because like, when would you exactly consider the words poison? Because like, if we play fetch or play soccer, he will drop and give, no problem. But would you consider it poison because it's randomly something he doesn't want to give and clenches? Is that when it's technically poison? Just certain things he finds?
That's a really good question. I think our cue is not effective in that moment, so I might not practice it. But what I think of as a poison cue is if it works less than 80% of the time.
Okay.
And that, again, is sort of like a random statistic. Just like my 200 times in 20 different environments. It's not scientifically studied. It's kind of a rule that I follow. So if you're practicing and you're trying to work with that same word and you're not having success, that's when I would consider it poisoned. And I would switch to something different. And you might start by capturing the dog's choice to drop something. So maybe we leave something out on the ground that they pick up, but it's not very good. and they pick it up because they're used to picking things up. And then we wait for them to spit it out on their own without even cueing. The moment they do that, yes, good dog. And they get a good treat.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely, no problem. Thanks for asking.
So, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So, my husband and I, we recently got a dog from a shelter, and we have a cat at the house, and who's used to having a dog around, but he recently passed away. So, we are trying to introduce the dog to our cat, and we've had the dog for about a week and a half now. And so we've done it by having him on the leash, but he is a preying dog. So if she makes a sudden movement, she's totally fine. Her demeanor, she doesn't even hiss at him. She just doesn't really care.
Yeah.
But he'll be good. And we've been rewarding him with treats every time we say his name and he looks at us instead of her. So he's getting a lot better. But you know, she's got like a little cold and she'll sneeze or something and he'll like freak out and try to lunge for her. So right now we have him in his cage while she's walking around and they're totally fine.
Okay.
So I'm just not sure what do we do next? What measures should we take?
Yeah, good question. So I'm always going to err on the side of safety, especially when I have a situation where it could be predator and prey. So I keep my management up longer than I think necessary. So oftentimes I'll have baby gates around so that I can have the dog in a specific space where the cat is not wandering, assuming that the gate keeps the cat out. I know a lot of cats will jump over a gate. I love that you're using the leash. I really like that he is comfortable when he's in his crate while she's loose. I would set it up so that every time the cat's around, really good things happen for the dog. So the cat's appearance predicts tasty things. All calm behaviors when the cat's around are reinforced. And then I want to just have the dog start to think of the cat as a social partner, as opposed to a possible prey item. So this kind of brings me to these 3 steps that I follow for behavior modification. The first one is set up the environment so they're not practicing the unwanted behavior. So you're already doing this. You have him on leash. You're practicing the crate so that we make sure that he's not practicing chasing the cat. I then want to provide an outlet for the dog for that natural behavior. So make sure he gets some time every day to practice predatory behaviors, but on something that's not the cat. So if we have a backyard, out in the backyard, fetching a toy, chasing a toy, you can use a flirt pole like I described earlier, so that he's getting to do the behavior he really wants to do, not towards the cat.
Right.
And then lastly, I want to teach an alternate behavior. And here I also want to teach an alternate emotion. So cat right now, we kind of like the cat. They're okay. I'm not too upset about the cat. Don't like it when they sneeze. Kind of want to chase them when they dart. So what I want is for him to start to view the cat as a friend. And to do this, I start to bring them together in training. So you might do this with 2 people at first, so we can keep a good enough distance that the dog's not possibly going to lunge at the cat and catch them. But I'd start to do what we call treat circles, where the cat gets a treat, and then the dog gets a treat. And the cat gets a treat, and then the dog gets a treat. And you can say their names when you do it. So if we have Janora is my dog and Fluffy is this stuffed dog, if I wanted Janora to view Fluffy as a social partner, I could say treat for Fluffy, and I give Fluffy a treat. Treat for Janora, I give Janora a treat. And I'll practice that several times. I'll do that for maybe a week or 2. And then I'm going to start to do cooperative training, where now I'm going to have the cat do a behavior. And cats can train just like dogs. They can learn how to sit. They can learn how to touch. So I'll have the cat do a very simple behavior. Maybe it's just step onto a certain platform, or maybe it's move towards your hand when you present your hand. And when the cat does that behavior, I'll say yes, and both the cat and the dog will get treats for it.
Oh,
And then I have the dog do a behavior, and I say yes, and both the cat and the dog gets treats for it. So now they're on the same team, earning treats together. And I'll maintain my management, like I said, until the dog has shown me for a long period of time that they're not practicing the behavior of chasing the cat. And we're starting to see more social behaviors towards the cat, and we no longer have any of that darting. I would also never leave them alone together,
right.
at least not until we are very, very sure. And I'm talking probably a year or two down the road on that one.
Oh, sure.
Just because
Yeah,
safety is number one.
Right. Yeah, I did this 16 years ago, but it was a long time ago. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And things are always changing. You know, we always learn more about how we can work with animals.
Right.
So I love that question. That's a really good one. And like I said, I kind of been working on similar things with the chickens. The chickens do a behavior and Janora gets treats for it. She's starting to like them.
Well, good. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. I hope it helps. And thanks for asking.
Yes, for sure. Take care.
All right, awesome. Okay, so we have the biggest issue with him. He's about a year and a half old. He's like 80 pounds. Big
boy.
happy dog. So when she's here, he jumps on her all the time.
Okay.
Bites at her. Not like in a violent way, but in more so like I don't know if he's trying to assert dominance with her, but like instead of like how he is with me, where he'll walk up and, you know, rub against me and want me to pet him, he just starts jumping on her. He does it to my sister too when she's around. And every once in a while he'll try to do the humping thing, but it's not as common as him just kind of chasing her around and biting her in the butt or, you know, jumping on her. And even if she turns around and gets upset and like pushes him down, like, no, he still just he'll just keep coming back.
Yeah.
Over and over.
That is a great question. So I do not think he's trying to exert dominance. Dominance typically happens within the same species, and dominance between dogs has a lot to do with resource holding capacity. So I have control over this resource, as opposed to I am dominant over you in a hierarchy, in a linear hierarchy. Our view of dominance has changed a lot in the last 10 years. But what I think is happening, since they're visitors, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, even when me and her lived together, he did the same thing all the time.
Okay.
I mean, it's like, you know, half the time he ignored her, but most of the time it's just jumping, biting. Like he's just too rough with her. I don't know if he's playing and he doesn't realize he's way too big to be doing that.
Yeah. I think we're seeing what we describe as arousal bursts. So he's getting really amped up, and jumping and biting tends to be a self-soothing behavior when you're overexcited. And the dogs tend to just pick a person. And here it seems like he's kind of picked women, perhaps, as it's a self-soothing. He can do this and it feels good and he practices it. And saying no or trying to get them to stop tends not to solve the problem in this case, because the dog is over aroused for some reason. And so there's a few things I would do. One, I want to track the behavior. When does it tend to happen? Is it at a certain time of the day? Is it when they're moving through a certain room? Is it when they first get there? Is it going upstairs? Is it any time and we have no pattern? Usually there's some sort of pattern. Maybe it's 30 minutes after a walk or 30 minutes after he ate. But I start to kind of take notes and see when it happens. I lived with a dog who did this to me. She was only 65 pounds, but she would still jump up, and I'm pretty short. She'd bite me on the shoulders and chest. And she did it when I walked through the living room and when I walked through the hallway specifically. And so something about those spaces caused her an arousal burst when I moved through them. And what I could see is that her pupils were totally dilated. You mentioned that he'll sometimes do humping behavior, which is typically actually associated with some level of stress. Again, stress being either excitement or frustration or fear. With this particular puppy who I was seeing this with, I figured out when it tended to happen, and I made sure I had a pocket full of her dog food on me at all those times. So I'd walk through the living room, and before she ran up to me, I'd start dropping dog food on the ground. And sniffing and searching for food is a naturally calming behavior for dogs. So she learned to come over and look for food on the ground. And I simultaneously was reinforcing any behavior that she did aside from jumping on me, because I started with the food. The food happened before any jumping occurred. Now, in the hallway, I did the same thing. I'd walk into the hallway, I'd throw food on the ground. It's just any behavior aside from jumping on me, just standing there, just breathing. That gets you food. That gets you reinforcement, as long as you're not jumping on me. Now, if the dog starts jumping and biting, because there is biting involved, I recommend getting behind a barrier. So having either a gate or an exercise pen or a door that they can put between themselves and the dog. This is not intended to be punishment. This is intended to make sure that we don't get any injuries, because biting, even if it's not meant to cause harm, it hurts. It doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I mean, I know he's not like super pressured with it. Like, he doesn't do anything that's gonna hurt her. It's just he's like nipping at her, like letting her know that he's there, or like that he wants her attention or something. And even when she gives him attention, he still does it. You know, we can give him treats, walk away, and he just keeps doing it. Or say her and I are standing there talking. As soon as we start talking, he's jumping on her, or if I go to give her a hug, he's jumping on me and her, like he's jealous or something.
Yeah, I think so. So in those moments, anytime I recognize that it tends to happen, and those are really good observations, that it's when we're talking and kind of ignoring him or hugging. I've seen it happen when somebody picks up the phone, because the phone predicts no attention for the dog. What I want to do is change the meaning of those situations. So here, I might not just throw food on the ground. I'm going to follow my 3 steps. So I want to manage it so he's not practicing. Perhaps we start off training sessions with him behind a gate, so he's not jumping up and biting. He's not practicing it.
Oh, he'll push it right down. It doesn't matter how big it is. He's knocking it down.
Strong boy.
He will run his head right through things if he wants something.
Oh, buddy. So in that case, we might have him either on leash or in a crate. What I want to do is also provide other self-soothing outlets. So making sure there's a lot of different materials around for him to chew. So different kinds of like harder bone type things for him to chew, soft toys as long as he doesn't eat them, rubber materials. I offer those items when he approaches. Here's some things for you to chew.
Like,
and I want to set up, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, filling the Kong with some peanut butter and just keeping it on lock in case she comes over, and just like, here you go, dude.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If he could have Kongs when she's over, like anytime she's over, he's getting Kongs, he's getting a bone covered in peanut butter, he's got wet dog food frozen onto a licky mat that he can work on, different things to occupy him. Those are like our outlets. He's got stuff that he can do so that he's not practicing that. Having him get lots of attention for calm behavior. So you choose to lay down and we come over and talk to you and we give you treats for it. So the calm behavior starts to build a reinforcement history. It feels counterproductive because the first few times you do it, they're going to get up and follow you around afterwards. And you're like, well, we woke the sleeping dog. But if we reinforce it, it will increase in frequency. And then finally, I want to set up those scenarios in which he practices it most. So hugging or talking to each other. And I want to do it at a really, really low level. So for hugging, for example, I usually start with a hand reach. And then I feed the dog a treat. And I reach a little closer and I feed the dog a treat. And for this exercise, because we know he might start jumping up and nipping, again, I'd have him either on leash or I'd have him in a crate or somewhere where we have, you can get like, they're called, oh, what are they called? Door nannies or gate nannies. You can get little rubberizers that you can put on the wall and screw on, and then you can put the gate in that so that it can't be pushed down as easily. It's like a security for the gate. Some people will do 2 gates stacked on top of each other so that he just isn't going to be practicing bolting through and jumping up and nipping. We just don't want him to keep practicing that, because right now it is serving a function for him. It is reinforcing in some way. But if we have, a Kong down on the ground and he's got a gate between him and we practice reaching towards each other and that predicts a treat, we can start to change how he feels about it so that he doesn't think, oh, I should jump up and bite. He thinks, oh, awesome. I love it when they hug. I get good things.
I just have one more question. I know I'm kind of holding you. I hope it's not.
No problem.
I have another little dog too. I don't know where the hell he was before now, but I've had him for a few years. He's a really calm. He just wants to sit down, chill out, lay down, and just mind his own business all the time. When we got this one, he doesn't want anything to do with him. The big one wants to go over and like nudge up to him, and anytime he gets near the little one like starts snarling and yell and like barks at him until he goes away. And I don't know how to stop that, because I tell him no and he just looks at me and then keeps nudging him like he's trying to get some like movement out of him. So I do start like yelling or getting louder or being like, dude, no, go lay down, not cool.
Yeah.
Because he's just upsetting the other one, and I can't get him to stop ever, but I can't get the other one to stop getting like kind of violent with him. He doesn't ever like attack him,
Yeah.
but it gets pretty close.
Yeah. The first thing I do in that situation is I try and find a safe zone for the little dog where the big dog doesn't go. So I'm thinking a small crate. So a crate that's too small for your 80-pound dog to get into, that the little dog can go to be away from him. And I make it really comfy and I give him really good things in there. That's sort of my step one. You have a safe zone where you're not going to get bugged by this big boy. The second thing I'm going to do is teach a really strong recall to our 80-pounder. So he learns that when you say, come, he should come sprinting over, because all the best things are going to happen. And I want to make sure that when I say that word, it always predicts good things and there's never any punishment, even if he doesn't do it. Because if we start to add in that I said come, and if you didn't come, I'm going to be mad, the word come becomes unpredictable. And the dogs kind of don't really understand that difference. With the little dog getting upset, I absolutely understand getting upset that the big boy is still nudging him. It's a natural response to be like, buddy, no, you really have to stop.
He just seems to kind of hate him too, because when we got him, it was like all the attention needed to go to him, and he's hardly getting any unless we're actually trying to, because we know that he's not getting any and he's sad. So he's just like sad, hates him, thinks he's a problem, and I just don't think it's ever going to change. But I'd like to get the big one to at least leave him alone and mind his own business from now on.
Yeah, I really think the most important thing is going to be creating a safe zone for the little dog. So figuring out a gate setup or having a room that's just for your little dog, or a crate so that he can go be away from the big dog. And then I think with the way their relationship is right now, you could do something like the treat circles I described for the cat and dog situation, where what I set it up is so that the big dog gets a treat, and that predicts the little dog getting a treat, so that he starts to like it when good things happen to the big dog. And then you could start having the big dog practice behaviors, really easy things at first, just to sit, that he's really good at, and both dogs get treats, so that your little dog starts to see this guy as an opportunity and not just a big oaf who's annoying him and taking away attention. I'm going to send an email in a few days that's going to have some resources in it. I'll send over teaching a puppy to read cutoff signals in play, which is an article I wrote a while ago, which can apply to all dogs, really. But it helps them read lower level signals that a dog is upset. So the little dog probably says no thank you before he gets to the point of growling and snapping. Most of them will turn their head away or try and slink away. He might be at the point where he chooses to growl and snap first because that's what's most effective. But that will give you a little description of how to teach the recall and pair it in such a way that we can teach your bigger dog when the little dog says no, the best thing he can do is just move away right away.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it helps. If you need any more assistance with those two, and anybody who's here, if you need any assistance with your dogs or teaching your dog and cat to get along, we do video sessions as well, just privates, which we could create like a really individualized plan for them. But I think you've got a good start there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much for asking your questions. It was great talking to you.
Hi. So we have a puppy who is almost 4 months old.
Mhm.
We're in puppy class and we're trying to teach her to come.
Yeah.
But we've realized that we were starting to poison come by bringing her inside. So we have a new word for inside.
Yeah.
But she still seems to only come sometimes. Most of the time we practice come outside because she actually seems less distracted outside than inside. We have a couple of cats and she loves the cats.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any, I guess, general recommendations, and how long should we expect it to take to teach really solid recall?
Yeah, good question. So recall can be tricky because we consider it what's called a naturally punitive behavior, in that if we call the dog to us and there's no reinforcement immediately for it, we accidentally have punished the dog for coming because they were doing something they wanted to do. We called them, they left that. They came to us. And if we don't pay off with something better than what they were doing, that goes into their book as not worth it. So my first tip is use the big high value reinforcers for this one. So don't start with kibble, use chicken. Don't start with just a little pet, use the best kind of play, her favorite thing. With recall, we want to set it up so that we're really careful about building our distance and our distraction level, and that we only ever use our verbal cue when we believe the dog can be successful, because we want 100% success on that one. So I will look at how far away I can be from the dog and they can be successful, starting just calling them from 4 or 5 feet away, building slowly till I can call them from 20 or 30 feet away. Then I will start to add in very small distractions. So there is a toy in the area, but it's not animated. No one's playing with it. Or there is another person there who's not talking to you. And then I start to increase the distraction level. There is a person there who's holding a toy. There is a person there who's talking to you a little bit, but kind of boring. There is a person there who's crouched down and talking to you more, but as soon as I call you, they stop talking. And I think about, if I'm adding a distraction, I want my distance to be shorter. Another important thing is that we want to make sure we are the most exciting thing in the environment at the time that we call them. So I'll say my recall cue only once. I only ever want to say it once, because if I repeat myself, they learn that come on means come instead of just come. I'll say it once, and then I'm going to use attention noises and attention signals with my body. So a kissy noise is one that I use a lot. Like I said, that used to be my dog's recall until I made her hate it, the poor thing. I will make high-pitched repeating notes, such as bup, 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 bup. I will crouch down, pat my legs, run backwards away, so that it encourages the dog to come towards me. Dogs, even young puppies, are chase predators, so they're going to chase what runs from them. So I use that to my advantage. I'll say, come, and then I'll run away, and they want to chase me. I'll start saying that word during games of fetch. If your puppy runs out and grabs a toy and then runs back to you with it, you could throw out a toy, they come grab it, we say, come, they come running back to us, because that's what they were going to do anyways. They get a really good treat, and then we throw the toy again. You could play that same game with just a tossed treat. And I want to make sure that they're 100% successful. So if I call them and they don't succeed, so I said, come, and the puppy is like, hold on, I got a really good smell over here. I'm super busy. Or there's a cat I would never leave. I love this cat. I'm going to walk over. I'm going to put a treat in front of their nose. I'm going to guide them all the way back to where I was. And I'm going to feed them that treat so that they went through the process of coming over. But I want to make sure that as much as possible, they're making that choice. They're succeeding on their own, and I'm not luring them over. I hope some of those tips help.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Okay.
And I guess if you don't mind, I have one other quick question.
Yeah.
About jumping and reinforcing.
Yeah.
So our dog is going to be enormous. She's going to be probably 120 to 150 pounds.
Oh, yeah. What kind of dog?
So jumping is not going to be an option.
Yeah.
And she likes to play chase, especially with my husband. He loves to play kind of rowdy with her.
Yeah.
And when she gets all up and excited about chase, she'll sometimes jump on you and kind of pull at your clothes.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, it started off where she would only do that to him, but she's kind of started to do it to me too, even though I'm much wimpier in my chasing.
Sure.
I don't want that to generalize to other people, and I don't want her to be jumping in greeting.
Yeah.
What are your recommendations about that?
Yeah. So there's several things I would do. First, I would prevent the jumping from growing in greeting by having every greeting predict something good on the floor. So there's treats on the floor when I greet people. That's kind of my first preventative measure. With the chase game, that's what's predicting the jumping up and nipping. I want to do a little work on what it means to catch someone. So either I'm going to only play that game when I have a toy in hand so that she can go to the toy and I'll direct her to that toy to play with. Or I need to really tone down my chase. So I'm just taking 1 or 2 steps away. And as she moves towards me, I say, yes, or good. And I drop treats on the ground. So chase actually means catch up to me and eat off the ground. Another technique I'll use is I'll play tag touch. So I teach the dog to touch the palm of my hand with their nose. If you're in puppy class, you maybe have done this one. So real simple behavior, you can start by just taking like a stinky treat and rubbing it on the palm of your hand so your hand is gross and stinky. Present it a few inches in front of the puppy's nose, and when they lean forward to sniff it, I'll say yes, and then I feed them a treat. Most puppies lean forward to sniff your hand because it's interesting. I'll do that repeatedly so the puppy learns moving towards the hand predicts food. And then I'll start to add in that hand target into my game of chase. This is actually what I did with my adult dog. She's an adult German Shepherd. I brought her home. She was probably 8 years old when I brought her home. And the first time we went and ran in our new backyard, she ran, jumped up, and held my arm like protection sport dog. And I decided we didn't want any of that. So I taught her a hand target, and I implemented that in our games outside. I run a little bit, and then I present my hand for you to touch. So catching you now doesn't mean jump up and bite at you. It means run up and touch your hand. And I keep that hand nice and low for my big dog so that they learn stay low when you do it. And again, we want to lower that arousal level a little bit at first, because if she's super excited, she's not going to be able to listen. And listening doesn't have to do necessarily with the verbal, even just this hand target. She might just bite onto it because she's so excited. So we'll tone it down a little bit and do something else, either eat food off the ground or touch my hand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that one helps. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. This was really fun. I really enjoyed all your questions. I love having other people talk, so thanks for asking them out loud. If you have any other questions in the future, feel free to reach out to us. You can email info@canineturbotraining.com. Our website has a ton of free resources as well, so canineturbotraining.com. Check out our free resources page. We have a blog there with lots of different articles to help with training.